Thank you very much indeed for coming to this talk. I hope you find it of interest. So I've written a book on the Battle of Pinkie with two colleagues. There's the front cover of it there. And if I sound rather vague tonight or have forgotten things, I do recommend you have a look at the book, not because it contains everything that is known about the battle. It's a starting point. And I hope lots of other people like you listening tonight will think, well, I think I could improve on what Caldwell was saying or come up with new information. That's what all this is about. So where was the Battle of Pinkie? And just very briefly, I'm sure you all know, it took place on the 10th of September, 1547, between a large Scottish army and a large English one, and we got beat quite considerably. And it's quite a remarkable battle because it's very well documented. And to a certain extent, we know where it took place. There's even contemporary illustrations of it, as in this slide here. So the title, where was it? And the obvious answer is it was at Pinkie. The more usual or full name is given as Pinkie Cleugh in recognition of that ravine, which is now largely built over and has Eden Hall Hospital in the bottom of it. But once you start looking into this, there are several issues that are worth looking at. I mean, for a start, there's more than one battlefield monument. There's the one at top right that Andrew was referring to, which was put there in 1988, just off the Salter Road. And it was basically put there in a free space. There wasn't any, real good reason why it was there, rather than lots of other places round about, it seems to me. And the actual marking on maps of where the battle took place has changed over the years. There was an even earlier monument, and you see it on the left there, that pillar, which allegedly marked the campsite of the English army. It's now in Louisville Park, but we know it's been shifted. It earlier stood in another location. It dates to the late 18th century. And then much more recent, put in the 1920s, is this monument at Ammon Park, Walliford. I don't really know what direct connection that's got with the battle, but it's obviously a bit of contemporary art which brightens up the locality. So Pinkie, where it is, where the battle took place, is an interesting one to look at, it seems to me. But there again, what do we mean by the Battle of Pinkie or the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh? Because there was another battle there, if you like, another engagement on the day before, on Friday the 9th September, involving quite considerable forces of horsemen on both sides. And this needs a lot more attention, it seems to me, because in terms of the history of warfare and what was happening in the course of the fighting, this is, I think, of quite considerable importance. The English had a very large force of cavalry, about 6,000 strong, and the Scots may have been fielding at this point up to 2,000. And this contemporary drawing that I've got up here at the top left, I think indicates, as can be worked out from the documentation, that this engagement took place on Carberry Hill and the other side of Carberry, to the south of Carberry Hill. And that's Carberry Hill there, with Cousland Castle just jutting out the bottom here. Now, I haven't got time to give you all the reasons for this interpretation here, but it means that the potential area of fighting, conflict between these two armies was much larger than might have been thought. And we might even wonder about other battles that took place on this territory. Now, the Scots generally, not the English, though it might be said, the Scots generally referred to the main battle on the 10th of September as the Battle of Pinkie, or the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh. Yet, there's every reason to think that the battle didn't actually take place. The fighting didn't take place around Eden Hall Hospital. But what I think that name is referring to is that on the morning of the 10th of September, one of the major things that happened is that the Scots crossed from the west side of the River Esk and took up position, drew up the battle lines in the immediate area of Inverest Church, St Michael's Church, the predecessor of the one there now. There's quite a large flat area up there on the top of a hill, Pinkie Hill, if you like. There's a whole area where the cemetery is now. The embankment there probably relates to a French fort built in 1548, thereabouts. And the other side of the church is quite an extensive summit area, some of it now a cricket ground, and it heads over to, and you can see there's a definite edge to it as the ground slopes down and into Pinkie Cleugh itself. And you can see, I think, the way that the Scottish Army is forming, they're beginning to form, to take up battle lines about the church. There, the church is there on this battle roll of which is contemporary. It's English, the battle roll that's in the Bodleian Library now. And that may be why the name Pinkie was given to the battle by the Scots. The main fighting didn't actually take place here, though, it has to be said, and we'll come back to that. As for the name Pinkie and how extensive it was, we don't have any reasonably detailed early map information of this locality. We have the Ordnance Survey maps of the 19th century, from which we can derive a lot of useful place names and various boundaries. And this map here to the right is my best attempt at trying to show where things were in the 1540s. The town of Musselburgh, essentially the main street now. There's St Michael's Church. The land of Pinkie, with Pinkie Cleugh in the centre of it, extending over here, Walliford next to it, and the fields of Inveresk down this way, and then beyond that, Fosside Brae, Fosside Hill, with the castle on the top. And interestingly, it must be said that Inveresk was one of the names which tended to be used by the English and other people for the battle. Now, you should maybe just think right at the beginning here, why are we doing this? What does it matter, actually? We know there was a big battle here. We know that we get beat. We know about the surrounding history. And so why are we bothered about where exactly it happened and who did what to each, apart from, lots of unpleasant things? Well, clearly, there's a lot of you who live locally who will be fascinated about what happened in the past. But it's about a lot more than that, it seems to me. History and our understanding of what happened in the past is built up from, various bricks, as it were, that are brought together and put together. And if you like, our understanding of the Battle of Pinkie and what happened, it's one of those bricks that goes into a much larger structure. And we've got to make sure that these bricks are absolutely right and they're mortared in the right place, if you like, so we get a decent overall picture. And in the case of Pinkie, it really was quite an important turning point in many ways. And it deserves a lot more study because we don't fully understand people's motives during the battle. We've got a lot of contemporary historical information, a lot of which has not been used very effectively. And from that, we've got a pretty good idea of what the English commander was all about. Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who was the protector of England on behalf of the young Edward VI. He was basically trying to achieve the takeover of Scotland by getting his hands on our baby Mary Queen of Scots so she could be married to the young Edward VI. And it wasn't an unreasonable thing for the English to want at the time. It would have made sense if the two countries had come together at that point. And at least some of the initial openings for this from the English could be construed as quite friendly and quite sympathetic. Whereas the English at this time in the north of France and in Ireland were not beyond programs of ethnic cleansing. In Scotland, it did take a rather more, believe it or not, a rather more gentle approach in their dealings with us Scots. And Somerset was coming offering peace and collaboration and also Protestantism. Scotland was officially a Catholic country, English was Protestant, and Seymour definitely had a drive to actually bring the two countries together in the one religion, as well as other things. James Hamilton, Earl of Arran, was the governor of Scotland at the time, and beyond the obvious that it was his job to protect his country and his people from enemy invasion, actually not very well informed as to what Hamilton was thinking and what his main aims were at the time. Because there isn't the same wealth of detailed analysis from contemporary Scottish writers as there is for England. And also, later writers about Hamilton didn't have a good word to say for him. He's not done well with historians. So that it might be hoped that more study of the battle will help us come up with a better analysis for what was happening. And there's other good reasons. This was a time when a lot of military historians think there was a military revolution, and in Europe and in the wider world, and Pinkie was at the centre of that, if you like. They're rather vague, a lot of these historians, as to what they meant by military revolution, but we're thinking in terms of that it was a period when larger armies, better formed armies were being fielded, ones which were well provided with guns, with administrative support, with new ways of fighting, new weaponry. And there was a new emphasis on use of ships and on new types of fortification. And a classic example of one of these new types of forts you can see down at Eyemouth, what we call Transitalian fortifications, earthworks basically, which were could be very strong and offer very good defence against attack by guns. And there's the fort built by Somerset on his way up to Pinkie, and there's later French fortifications of the 1550s. Other reasons why Pinkie are particularly important at the moment. Historic Environment Scotland has a duty of creating and maintaining an inventory of historic battlefields. Pinkie is one of their key battlefields. And this is not just a matter of drawing people's attention to an important battlefield, because you could argue, well, what's the point, doing that if it's all, sort of the grounds be developed and covered with houses and other things. But it also has very major implications for planning. And those are very serious considerations. And this line that's been drawn around an area, including the supposed battlefield site, is their area of interest, if you like. And in my view, there are challenges about this because it's enclosing areas which are beyond serious study, and it also excludes areas which are probably of great importance. So identifying where the battle was, it seems to be, is of very considerable importance. Now, there was what appeared to be a good start to understanding Pinkie in the work of Sir Charles Ormond, who was a very distinguished Oxford-based historian who published accounts, more than one account of the battle, and including this map, which he published, I think, in 1937. And Ormond was so distinguished that a lot of more recent historians, up until quite recent times, tended to say, oh, well, Ormond said this, and Ormond was such a distinguished historian, he must have got it right, so there's no point in us doing much more about it. But there's so many reasons why you shouldn't do that under any circumstances. But in any case, this is most certainly not Ormond's best work. I doubt very much if he actually ever went to Pinkie, to be honest, on the basis of this. Now, you people who live locally might just get the sense that this is not a very accurate map, not that it's got a scale of the area around Musselburgh, or where the battle was fought, is pretty atrocious, actually. And not even that, the actual outline of the battle, frank about it. He was looking at this very much from the point of view of an English gentleman, dealing with people up north who deserve to be beaten, and showed a thing or two about how things ought to be. Read it for yourself and see. So those are major misfortunes about it. But one of the sources he did use a lot was a book with these tables by William Patten, who, if you like, was a junior staff officer in the English Army, and very probably was required to write what amounts to the official account of the English battle. It's a very detailed and good account, but it is very biased, it's not, and Patten could not see all that was happening. But although these tables look rather messy, they do actually contain, and are not to scale, obviously, they do actually contain a great deal of very useful information on the development of the battle. And these were certainly used by Patten and other people. The other major source, sorry about that was used by Patten, was this roll of paintings in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, the Battle of Pinkie roll. And to a large extent, this can be interpreted as like a comic strip. It's showing various phases in the battle. Not to scale, doesn't give enough topographical detail to use a scale or anything like that. And unfortunately, it was very considerably misunderstood by Sir Charles Oman. For one, he didn't recognise, for a reason I don't have to go into at the moment, what the authorship of it was. I think it was actually drawn by Sir Richard Lee, who's effectively Master of Artillery in the English Army. He's done other diagrams like this, and it was probably drawn to use as a templates for other work, perhaps house decorations down in England. But it doesn't actually show all the battle. Arguably, it's missing out one of the key events in the battle. And those things, I think, have got to be taken into account when it's being used. So a lack of serious topographical information on the battle. We have place names like Pinkie and Fosside Hill. Very few fixed points identified in reliable early sources. And you get down to things like St. Michael's Church. The early 19th century church that's still there, St. Michael's Church, is presumably right bang in the site of the medieval church, which we see from this earlier painting. Fosside Castle, very considerably remodelled. It features in the battle, but the restored house there is certainly, contains the remains of the castle that was there in 1547. The so-called Roman Bridge is, to a large extent, contains the remains of the bridge that the Scottish Army had to cross to get to engagement with the English. And of course, the town of Musselburgh, the centre of the town of Musselburgh, is still where it's always been. The toll booth steeple there is probably about the only structure that's still there that predates 1547. And incidentally, it seems to have had a clock in 1546, which may well have been where Patten and other people got their idea of time, during the course of the day for things happening. But, when you get down to trying to identify where the battle took place, what do we mean by the battle anyway? That large armies on the Scottish side, probably about 23,000 men, not to mention all the camp followers and other people in the camps who could have been about the same number, if not more, not to mention, spectators and people who were bringing food for sale. The English army, maybe about 17,000. They had about 6,000 horse, and there would have been a lot of spare horses. there's something like 900 wagons. Lots of activity, lots of things happening, not to mention the English fleet. That was a major part of the battle strategy. Maybe up to well over 20 ships of various sorts off the coast. So all these things have to be taken into account when we're trying to locate where things were happening. And I think one of the key things that I sense a lot of people have found difficult to understand is just how big a footprint the encampments of these two sites, these two armies, required. I've marked in purple there the location of the Scottish camp to the west of the River Esk, and extending over to Brunstane, and the front edge of it on Monkton Hall Terrace, just adjacent to the River Esk there. I mean, it's over a mile square. And it's possible that the Scots had encampments of, for horses and other people extending right down, really almost to Dalkeith. Very large area. The English camp probably took up a large area as well. And there's been serious problems as identifying exactly where it was. Now, of course, one would like to, dig and find the fortifications we know the English put round their camp. We'd like to, excavate and try and find where the Scots pitched their tents, all that sort of stuff. But of course, we're dealing with a landscape which has changed enormously and which is very largely built up. So a lot of the sort of research we might want to do is quite difficult. We probably think of the battlefield as being, this is September, with having a lot of crops growing in it. It's very fertile ground, some of the best in Scotland. The army marching through fields of stubble, over rigs and furrows. The Scottish army heading, in a major part of the battle towards the high ground in Fosside Hill. And, that image there taken from the main railway line just at Inverness, you might think looks like a bit like what it must have looked like in the 16th century. But nothing could be further from the truth. What a lot of the documentation and archaeological research has shown is that landscape has changed massively since the 16th century. And one thing to in particular bear in mind is it's quite clear from contemporary documentations that to a considerable extent it was an industrial landscape. There was a lot of mining, coal mining, with consequent waterways and pits and slag heaps, all sorts of debris like that could have impeded armies and changed that landscape quite considerably. We also know that it was a landscape which was managed quite considerably in later times. Pinkie Cleugh itself, which is just off this away, it's very difficult to because it's now got buildings in it, not least Edenhall Hospital, which you can see sticking up there, just adjacent to these fields here. And of course, another problem in identifying what happened is the way the shoreline has changed since the 16th century. Also the course of the River Esk, incidentally. The course of the River Esk has very probably changed in a significant way further upstream from the Roman bridge. But what is generally regarded as a significant factor in the battle is the ability of English ships to fire on the Scots, come in close to the shore, and that's a difficult one to take into account, given the way that the coastline has changed. But more obvious changes that have happened. There's been the mainline railway taken through the general area of the battlefield, with enormous cuttings. This resulted in even watercourses, and other improvements in agriculture has resulted in watercourses being changed or done away with, rivers flowing differently. And in more recent times, the construction of the A1, and this is a shot that was taken in 1985, looking east across the River Esk where the bridge is. And what you're looking at there is a massive swathe of ground which has been totally dug up and churned up in the process of building the road. And what seems reasonably clear is that the whole general area of what is regarded as a battlefield, it's not pristine 16th century ground. It's changed enormously. Archaeological work has shown there's quite an overburden of where the landscape has been changed, mine workings have been filled in. And where there has been detailed archaeological work, and here's an example of the sort of thing that units like CFA and AOC Archaeology Group have been doing to try and locate the battle. I mean, there's a theory amongst archaeologists that you might be able to identify battlefields by finding artifacts that were lost on the day of the battle. There's lots of difficulties about that. There's practically no artifacts that you could pull out the ground anywhere in this country and say, ah, that dates to 1547, or can guarantee it was lost on the 10th of September. Never that simple. But there's a very detailed approach to an area in what was regarded as the central area of the battlefield at Gula Flats. Lots of trenches have been dug, lots of artifacts found, literally hundreds, but there's practically nothing there that could even be the right date for the battle or is found in any context which is meaningful. And that is the story over all the areas where there's been detailed archaeological research. That line there marks the inventory area. The areas in blue mark where there's been archaeological work, and there's practically nothing that would identify where the battlefield was. And what I didn't make clear earlier on is that in any case, you know, the 9th, 10th September weren't the only times that military activity was taking place here. 1544, the Scottish Army, big English army were marching across here, probably engaging with each other, a lot of the same people, the same weapons, you know, marching across this area. And amazingly, September 1548, a Scottish-French army of large size was drawn up on the same ground as the Scottish army drew up in September 1547 and outfaced a large English army that was positioned the other side of Pinkie Cleugh that come for the relief of Haddington. So even if in this area you found, you know, for the sake of argument, you know, swords or bits of armor, you know, of the right date, or they even had the heraldry on them of known people who took part in the battle we're talking about, you wouldn't be able to use that as proof that they were lost in the battle, and that would help you identify where it was. And when you get down to the actual relics that have any meaning, attention is often drawn to pieces of lead shot, like these ones here, some of which have obviously been battered by impact, perhaps just into the ground. But one of the problems about pieces of lead shot like this is that we get no real means of dating them any closer than, say, the early 16th century up to the mid 19th century. Not on the basis of size or composition. And what we do know from archaeological work and finds from elsewhere in lowland Scotland, if you walk across any field in lowland Scotland, the chances are you'll pick up balls like this from people who've been out hunting or poaching. There are very few, you know, sort of finds that might be this right sort of date or type for the battle. These two items here have come from Crookston, which is down to the south of the present-day A1, out with the area of what has been considered as a battlefield. But, you know, and this is the rim from a medieval chafing dish, which might date or have been used as late as 1540s. But are we really expecting that any soldier had one of these in his kit bag or got it out, you know, during the battle to admire it? I don't think so. There's a better explanation for finds like this and a few others of medieval date, and that is the fairly well documented practice of local farmers of purchasing the night soil from the streets of Edinburgh. All the crap that accumulated in the streets of Edinburgh, they brought their carts into the town, wheeled it away and put it over their fields as manure. And that is the explanation of how a lot of trinkets get in get in the fields around places like Inveresk and Musselburgh. There's just one or two objects which might just make one think that's the remains of a silver enamelled badge with what you might call a Tudor rose that's found down at Crookston. Might just possibly be from from a soldier or an officer in the English army, but no guarantee of, you know, whether, and it's, I suppose something like that is likely to have landed in the soil fairly close to where it was pulled off his uniform or whatever. But it's not a lot to go on, one has to say. Where archaeologists have often focused their attention is on gunshot, you know, round shot, major bits of fired from guns. And we know both sides at Pinkie had significant resources in artillery, and artillery duels were a significant part of the battle. This is a detail of some of the Scots artillery in an early carving at Edinburgh Castle, by the way. And this is just a detail from a contemporary copperplate engraving. This is the Scottish Army firing their guns and the English Army firing their guns here. But in the whole general area of the battlefield, all that's turned up is some half a dozen bits of shot, including and shot, you know, cast iron shot, if you like. It's quite difficult to date. And as I said earlier on anyway, given the amount of military activity here and the fact that the French built a fort at Inveresk in 1548, that there was activity by Cromwell, that there was a 19th century fort, very difficult, you know, to pick up a piece of round shot and say, oh yeah, that was maybe fired in 1547. You know, if there was a number of them, we might be able to say something on the basis of size. But when you pick up a shot, when this landscape has been messed around so much over the years and soil shifted around and digging's done, you pick up a piece of shot anyway. You know, how far is it rolled? Which side was it fired from? Was it used for other purposes, like the Scots played a game called henching or bullets, where they threw the pieces of shot like that along roads, a bit like bowls that the French play? You know, or was it, you know, used for some other purpose? There are one or two pieces, though, which are what we call composite round shot, where what we've got is a dice of iron, a cube of iron, if you like, which has then been wrapped in lead to make it more round. And shot like that is likely to date to the 16th century, but it doesn't take us to the 10th of September 1547 necessarily, given everything else that's happening. And you know, we don't know the circumstances of how it got in the ground or shifted around. So all this may sound a very negative picture I'm painting, as indeed it is, as also attempts to analyse the landscape in using LiDAR, one of these new remote sensing techniques, to try and understand the landscape, and that hasn't allowed us to get any very detailed information, I have to say. So what are we left with? Well, and this is dealt with in the book, which I hope you'll read. It seems to me and my co-authors that one of the key things to look at is one of the main bits of information which is provided about the battle by William Patten, and that is the presence of a feature, a natural feature, which he calls the slough, which the English horse, when they mounted a major attack against the Scottish vanguard, had to cross. And if we can identify that slough, we're in business in trying to understand where the main fighting between the two armies took place, and also it might help us find what is one of the main things we might hope to find that might still be there untouched, are the burials for the English who fell in the battle. Now, there were relatively few English compared with the Scots who got killed, but Patten is quite specific. The day, the 11th of September, Somerset and the English rode up to where the main encounter had taken place. They identified all the bodies which they knew were English people, and they buried them where they fell, next to where the fighting had taken place. that if we could find that, we'd be home and dry in a way in knowing where the battle was. And it helped enormously, I think, in the interpretation of what really happened in all sorts of different ways. So the Slough is not a name that appears on maps. There was no knowledge of it into recent times. All we've got are these tables in Patton's book, which mark the Slough with the letter K. There it is there, adjacent to Regan Furrow, and that's about all we've got to go on, as it were. But we even have to consider, well, what is a slough? Now, for a lot of people, a slough is an area of marshy ground, and that is one of the main meanings of the word. But if you check your dictionaries, it can also mean a ditch, a sort of water course, if you like, not a river or a burn, but an actual ditch, a linear feature. And I think that's what Patton's describing, and what he's showing in the maps is a linear feature, which arguably might mark the division between the cultivated ground and the moorland, the pasture, if you like, uphill a bit towards Fortnight Hill. So it's not something like that watercourse, which extends towards the River Esk, and which is probably, 18th century in origin. What it may be is something rather bigger, something which couldn't be jumped over by horse, but something which was a reasonable obstacle, but which the English horse could still get across to get to the English vanguard, as is described in the fighting. And what we have identified as being that is a feature now known as Colton Dean, which is quite a significant ravine, if you like, not very steep-sided, now full of trees, which has had a watercourse in it. I mean, arguably it was originally the headwaters of the Ravenshoe Burn, which has now largely disappeared here, started. But that's looking at this feature, Colton Dean, well to the south of the A1, if you like, and on the slopes, if you like, lower slopes of Fortnight Hill. That's looking at basically from the east, which is the direction that the English may have sent in their cavalry charge, one of the main things that happened during the battle. And these horsemen would have come to this, they would have had to ride down, there's probably trees there as well, get through this, and then on the other side, the space of about a stone's throw or two stone's throw was the Scottish vanguard lined up, which actually emballed the English attack, which saw them off, and which would have or could have or should have resulted in the Scots having a resounding victory in the course of the battle, but they didn't. So that is where it seems to me that archaeological and research and an analysis of the documents has taken us. That is the key thing that you people perhaps are much more able than me to evaluate. Go and have a look at this landscape, even though it has changed a lot. Have a look at that. Have a look at the other evidence, the written evidence we produced, and see if you can get this to work. We looked at other ways of looking at the battle. I mean, one of the key things which it seemed to me Charles Oman also got wrong was this assessment of how large an area of ground was occupied by the different units that took place in the fighting. And this is something that we gave a lot of attention to. How much area did one man with his pike take up? How much area did a horse take up? How much area did they take up when they were on the march? All those things are considerations when you're trying to work out where the armies were. There are one or two bits of information on distances, like the two armies at a particular stage in the day being 2 bow shots apart. Well, you can do research on how long a bow shot was in England. We've got the evidence of the bows from the Mary Rose as well. We can play with data like that to try and hone our information on what actually happened. The result of all this is that we've tried to come up with an interpretation of the battle, which I think has moved on a bit from earlier ones, and which I hope will be a basis of discussion. But here, very briefly, what we're seeing here is the, excuse me, the Scottish Army drawn up in line of battle at Pinkie Hill, just adjacent to St Michael's Church, on the morning of the 10th of September. 3 units of footmen and a unit of light horse. And the English army is setting out from its camp further to the east. This is it, still in the line of march, and it's a bit of a surprise for them when they're perhaps over just inland from Goshen, when they see that the Scots are looking for a battle. And there's a long pause. There's probably a long pause for several hours as both commanders think what they're going to do. I mean, the English presumably intended to keep on marching and head for Edinburgh. They hadn't expected that Arn was going to actually make a stand there. That was not their thinking. But at some point during the course of the day, Arn decided that he was going to shift his army inland, arguably heading for the high ground of Fosside, head up towards the castle there. Now, it's not 100% clear why he was doing that, what he thought he was doing. Other people in the past have said, oh, well, you know, he was heading through Howmire, this area which is now marked on the maps, or that might have had an effect on the battle. It's not a mire now. We've got no evidence of it being a mire any earlier than the late 18th century. And arguably what it is it's a result of bad drainage with the changes in the field improvements, the building of the railway and the filling in of mine workings. There's no evidence from contemporary accounts of the battle that bogs or mires in this area had any effect in the battle. So the Scots were just passing through. And this alarmed the English. They thought, we're going to be outflanked here. The Scots are going to gain the high hill. And the English immediately moved inland as well to try and match what the Scots were doing. The English here on the line of march inland perceived that they were going to be beaten to the high ground by the Scots. So Somerset decided to send in a major force of cavalry to stay the Scottish advance. And this is what I was describing a few minutes ago. Heavy horse being sent out, having to cross over Colton Dean, if that really is the slough, and keep the Scots at bay, while the English manoeuvred into a better position and got in the line of battle. It was almost a disaster straight away for the English. The cavalry were repulsed by the Scots, and a lot of them fled in disorder. That was the point at which the Scots should have been home and dry and had a major victory. But in remanoeuvring after the cavalry charge, I think what happened is that the Scots, who were rather inexperienced, not well trained, got themselves in a fangle. If you're trying to maneuver large, square forces of foot soldiers, each of about 6,000 guys, and they're not well trained, and there's not a very adequate command structure, quite difficult to do. And I think the Scots got in a real mess. They get too close together, and they couldn't actually drop a line of battle properly. And this gave the English an opportunity to regroup and ride in and win a very famous battle. So I said there was no doubt that it was a major victory for the English. Yeah, maybe in a day. But there's another story here that we were the ultimate victories. Arn had a happy old life and died in his bed with a French dukedom, still head of his family. Somerset and some of the other English commanders literally lost their heads soon afterwards because of their cock-ups in an ill-judged programme of campaigning in Scotland. And one of the most remarkable outcomes in many ways was that what the battle taught Scottish governments was that, well, maybe we can't and shouldn't invest so much money in military development. Perhaps we could play a clever game here. And essentially, in the later part of the 16th century, we played a game were to some extent playing the French off against the English, where we didn't invest in clever work. In fact, we invited the English in on more than one occasions to solve our military problems for us. You know, it was which is quite remarkable in many ways. And in 1603, the English thought, well, we might as well invite that boy James in to be the king of a united kingdom. That was quite a remarkable success, a victory. And to some extent, that stemmed from Pinkie. Maybe not so much stemming from it as a pivotal battle in terms of, you know, military technique or sophistication, but in political terms, we Scots did pretty well out it. There are limited opportunities. Hopefully, perhaps you guys will find where the slough was, what it was. We'll find the actual burial of the English, which I think could tell us so much. But I think that a lot of the future in archaeological work to do with the battle is to look elsewhere, to look at where the Scots army mustered at Fallermoor, to look at the various places where the English camped, and see if we can get more information in places like that. And although we did find lots of sources, written sources for the battle, there's still a lot to be found. Amy Blakewell, who's a very fine historian at St Andrews University, has pointed out to me that there's probably a lot more information could be got from local sources about the battle, borough records and so on, which are still sources that need to be tapped. So I hope that giving you some ideas to think about or disagree with, or that hopefully it'll give you some ideas where you think, well, I could do better, there's maybe more information I could find out. So thank you very much indeed for listening.